Hello, everybody. It's Tuesday night. It's 7 o'clock, and we are live. Hello, everybody. It's Tuesday night. It's 7 o'clock, and we are live. Welcome to V-Talks. I'm your host, Veronica Brockwell. Some of you may have noticed that I've stepped away from the mic for a few weeks. Unfortunately, I had a death in my family. My mother passed away on January 3rd, and I wasn't really quite ready to sit here and chat with you all. But one thing that my mother always said is, no matter what, I want you to keep doing this podcast, because if you help one person, it's worth it. So tonight I am back. I am doing this podcast. I'm going to try not to cry. And I've got my mom's favorite doctor on, Dr. Michael Wild, and he is a chiropractic physician, a functional medicine practitioner, and a certified cellular and detoxification specialist. And he is here tonight to talk about Omicron, and I'm so glad to see him because he's my favorite doctor too. All right, so I'm going to bring Michael on. Hello, my friend.
Hello. Just want to say, I'm really sorry to hear about your mom. And, of course, as usual, I've got Ralphie. So Ralphie and I are going to send you virtual hugs.
Yeah.
Yeah, the best that we can do.
Yeah. I had it. I wasn't crying when I brought you on.
Yeah.
And then I started talking about it, and I'm like, it's.
When I lost my dad 15 months ago, and we've all lost someone. We know what you're going through. No one knows exactly what you're going through, but of course, you're in our hearts.
Thank you. Well, I will tell you, my mother never missed a show that you were on. She believed in everything you've said wholeheartedly, and so I had to do it.
I'm sorry I never got to actually meet her, but I've obviously been reading what you've been posting on Facebook, and everyone just talks about what a wonderful person she was, and what a wonderful spirit she still is.
Yes, she is. All right, my friend, we have a virus.
We do. We have more of the same, yet different.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So here we are again, right? The saga goes on. It seems like, when will this ever go away? And the good news is it actually seems like it might be starting to go away. And Omicron, the latest variant, might be the beginning of the end of the real severe cases of COVID.
Okay.
Right? And the reason we say that is there were three main variants of concern up to this point, right? There was Alpha, then there was Delta, and then there was Omicron. Mm-hmm. And we didn't hear a lot about Alpha, but we're dealing with that as the, kind of the initial COVID. Mm-hmm. We didn't use those terms a lot. And then when there was a first variant that came out that said, hey, this is a little bit different, close enough to be the same thing, but a little bit different, that was Delta. Now, what's interesting about with viruses and their variants is viruses will always mutate. There will always be variants. That's what viruses do. That's what bacteria do in order to survive something that's putting up a defense in front of them, right? Yeah. So bacteria mainly react against antibiotics, right? Now, viruses, and especially in this case, it's been said that Omicron is the first great vaccine escape variant. And what that means is, did you notice it didn't appear until everyone started getting vaccinated, right? Because the vaccines do create antibodies against the spike proteins. Okay. And so they create a massive initial burst of an onslaught of antibodies. Now, that works better for some people than others. But when that happens, it's putting up this sudden big wall in the face of this coronavirus where it says, okay, I have a new hurdle I have to get over, around, under if I'm going to survive. And so it mutates.
Right.
Common mutations are very small, and most variants are very similar to the original strain. And so when you look at the genetic sequencing of a variant, and it's made up of, say, 1,000 itty bitty little bits, a variant might be 3 to 5 bits different. Okay. Well, Omicron is about 54 bits different.
Huh.
So it's a huge shift, and about 30 of those bits are different right around the spike protein itself, right? So there's different parts of the virus, and the spike protein is the part we keep talking about because that's the part that the vaccines are focusing on trying to replicate, trying to get the immune system to recognize, because the spike protein is like the claw that attaches to the cell to let the virus burrow in and take over the cell and become a virus factory. And then it makes more spike proteins attached to more viruses, which then spit out from that cell and attach to the next cell. And it goes on, and they tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and it goes on, and we call that an infection, right? So when there are vaccines and there are antibodies popping up, they have to vary themselves in order for that virus to get around all that and still maintain that kind of propagation. So the biggest obstacle that popped up was a sudden onslaught of these new antibodies. So Omicron mutated much more significantly than previous variants did, right? So one thing that I kind of shake my head at is I see this in the media and I see it in the public, a lot of finger pointing at it's the unvaccinated that are causing these variants. And the reality is it's actually the opposite. So there are many more variants found in the body of a vaccinated person than there is unvaccinated. And it really doesn't matter, right? There's always going to be variants. There's a big to-do made about nothing. What matters is how contagious is the newest variant and how virulent is the newest variant. How fast can you catch it? How fast can you spread it? And how deadly is it?
Yeah.
That's all that really matters. It doesn't matter where it came from. Stop pointing fingers, people. Right? It doesn't really matter. What matters is it's here. Let's deal with it. Okay. So when we talk about Omicron, I said it actually might be the beginning of the end. And what I mean by that is where Delta was a much more, and the original Alpha was a much more intensive lower respiratory disorder that led to massive inflammation and the cytokine storm we've spoken about before in the lung tissue, which damaged the lungs, led to micro blood clots, microcoagulation, led to further blockaging, and caused a lot of the death with that. Omicron doesn't seem to do that, right? Omicron is an upper respiratory and sinus infection. It can be a nasty one, right? You can still get pretty sick with it, but it's really probably not going to kill you. It's much more likely just to seem like a really bad cold, right? Now, that being said, there are always people with comorbidities, right?
Yeah.
And what that word means is other factors that relate to causing our death or are more likely to cause death, right? So in the case of Delta, for example, we saw a lot of hospitalizations. We saw a lot of people dying. We said they died from coronavirus. But the reality is they had all these comorbidities. As a matter of fact, I have some data up in front of me that 84% of all fatal cases were people who had other disorders who were likely to kill them by themselves. 84%.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
But only about 15% of cases did not have some other serious life-threatening disease that already knocked that person down. So
Right.
without that, they would not have died. So did they really die from coronavirus? Or did they die from cardiovascular disease made worse by the coronavirus? Hypertension, diabetes, cancer, right? And these other
So
things.
are you saying that any sort of virus or infection could have possibly affected that person in the same
Right.
way?
And they were
Is that
just
what
as likely to die if they got pneumonia
Mhm.
or if they got the flu, right? But it just so happened that the virus du jour is COVID. right?
Well, I have a question. I have several friends that had COVID. They had two vaccines and a
Mm-hmm.
booster,
Mm-hmm.
and
And
they got
still
sick.
got it, right?
Yes. So,
And
can you
go ahead.
explain how the booster is the booster weakening the immune system in some way, or I'm just
So
curious.
yeah, there's a lot of research going into that right now. There's not a lot being said about it to the public, but there's a lot of
Okay.
research going on in regard to the fact that there's a couple different things that could be going on here.
Okay.
And it's not 100% clear yet, so I can't
Yeah.
say without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
But there's really strong evidence pointing to the fact that the more shots you get, the more likely you are to get Omicron. Okay. And not necessarily because it's weakening your immune system, which there's other research that says it is.
Okay.
That the more times you hit the body with this surge of trying to make antibodies, it weakens your natural antibody response.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you come in contact with other new variants, you actually don't have a resistance against them, right? Now, Omicron being so different than the original strains, it's almost so different. You might want to call it a new virus.
Well, I was going to ask you that too,
Right?
because I spoke with a friend about that today, and she was questioning that as well. Is this even related?
Yeah, and I'm not really sure where that line gets drawn.
Mm-hmm.
I've not seen anything about that. They're still
Yeah.
calling it a variant of
Mm-hmm.
SARS-CoV-2, but it's
Yeah.
extremely different, right?
Well, I mean, I had Delta,
Yeah,
and it does seem different. The symptoms seem different. You don't even have you don't even lose your taste
right.
with
So
this one,
really,
right?
virtually none of those similarities. You don't lose taste and smell. You don't appear to create blood clots, which was the biggest problem with Delta, really. You
And
don't have this.
if you do lose your taste, then more than likely you have COVID,
Yeah,
right?
so if you
Those are still
well,
out there,
right.
right?
So let's put it this way: they're all coronaviruses,
Okay.
but that's a wide open field. There are over 100 coronaviruses,
Okay.
right? Some of the common colds are coronaviruses. The common flu is a coronavirus. So Omicron is a coronavirus, but is it COVID? Not really sure.
So
Not really
is
sure.
that why the rapid test is picking up a lot of different viruses?
Right. And that's one of the things, too, that I
Okay.
tell people all the time. They say, oh, I tested positive for COVID. I said, how? What test did you take that was specific for COVID? And they said, well, I did the antigen test, the thing up my nose.
Yeah.
I said, well, that means you have a coronavirus,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't tell you which one. And your doctor can't even tell you which one based on that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There we need the symptomatic picture. Do you have that and your lungs are on fire and you can't breathe and you're creating blood clots? Yep, you've got COVID.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have that and you have a runny nose and an upper respiratory infection and a headache and fever? You likely have Omicron. Okay. So Omicron is spreading like wildfire, and that's a good thing because the more Omicron we get, the less Delta we'll have, right? So if you look at something called the R naught value, the R naught value explains or describes how contagious something is. And actually, I believe it's NAUGHT, R naught. Okay. And what that means is the R naught value of the original COVID was 2. For every one person got infected, they were more likely to infect 2 other people.
Mm-hmm.
Then they infect 2 other people, and they tell 2 friends, and they tell 2 friends.
Yeah.
So that's how it spreads. The R naught value for Delta was around 4. All right.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Maybe even up to 6, depending which study you look at. The R naught for Omicron is 10.
Wow.
Right? So that's a big jump.
Oh yeah.
Right? Because one person infects 10, then they infect 10, 10, 10, 10.
Yeah.
It really rapidly spreads. And actually, when we did the promo, short little video for tonight's presentation, I talked about the fact that they said 73% of the cases were now Omicron. And that was actually a month ago. And the day after I said that, they came out and said, oh, that was a gross miscalculation. We really extrapolated improperly with our stuff. And the CDC came back and said about 20% cases are Omicron. So up to a month ago, we still saw a lot of hospitalizations and people complaining of this lower respiratory and can't breathe and the blood clots. And most of the hospitalizations were still truly Delta.
Okay.
It was only about 20% Omicron. And then around mid-January, around the 18th or so, the number was up to about 70%, really. And now the latest data that came out yesterday said we're at 95% Omicron.
Okay.
So it is spreading quickly. And again, everyone's going to get it. It's like a cold, right? Everyone's going to get it. And some people are going to have a really bad cold. Some people are going to have a really mild cold, right? That's what's going to happen. Now, people with comorbidities are still going to have a rougher time. Now, in the case of Delta, just some stats. About 9% of all the people who ended up dying from Delta had cardiovascular disease, heart disease, previous stroke. About 27% had high blood pressure. About 17% had diabetes. About 7.5% had other respiratory disorders like COPD.
Yeah.
About 3.5% had cancer, right? And about 15% had a variety of lots of other major diseases, making up that about 84% we talked about at the beginning.
Yeah.
Now, those same people, if they didn't already die and they have those same kind of things, they may have a tougher time with Omicron.
Yeah.
But from what they've shown so far in the data, they've not found a single case of someone who died from Omicron.
Really?
With these other things.
Mm-hmm.
But even that's very, very rare compared to Delta.
Yeah.
All right. So we're still seeing a lot of hospitalizations because people still get sick.
Of course.
There's other things going on. And I don't know if you saw this, but this was known from the beginning by people who look at the research, but it was not being reported that when we hear these numbers about how many people are in the hospital with COVID, if you go in with a broken arm and then they swab your nose while you're there and you come up positive, they call you a COVID case. If you go in from a car accident and they swab your nose, which they're doing with everyone, and you come up positive, it doesn't mean you're sick with COVID. It means you have some molecular pieces of that DNA in your nasopharynx. And guess what? You have molecular pieces of all kinds of DNA in your nasopharynx from all kinds of diseases, but we don't say you have it. We say you have it when you express the entire symptomatic picture of that. If you swab my throat right now, you'd probably find chickenpox virus. Do I have chickenpox? No, no one would say I have chickenpox until I have chickenpox and they start coming out of my body and I have the sickness that goes along with it. So the presence of the genetic material does not make it a case. Never has in all of history.
So my question there is, can you still spread the virus?
You can, just like you can spread anything else, right? If you have chickenpox, you can spread the chickenpox up to 2 days before you actually start expressing the pox. But you may also have chickenpox in your throat and not have enough viral load, enough density of it to share it.
Okay.
And that's part of the problem even with the PCR tests is, and I think we may have discussed this before, but when they take a swab, they're getting such a small amount, they can't really determine the viral load.
Right.
They can't tell if this is spreadable or not. And so they have to magnify that. And depending on the number of cycles you magnify it, will determine whether or not you say, oh, now it looks like there's enough viral load that this could potentially be transmissible.
Yeah.
And so we're going to say that you have an asymptomatic case.
Yeah.
Right? So there's funny memes going around like, you don't have any symptoms? Well, that's the first symptom. Right? So it gets really confusing, right?
Yeah.
So with any virus, you have a certain period of days in which you can spread it even before you are symptomatic, but you're much more transmissible when you are symptomatic, right? So there's a very minute chance you can spread it when you're not yet symptomatic, but symptomatic means your body's trying to expel that virus. You're coughing it out, you're sneezing it out, right? In the case of chickenpox, there's open weeping sores that force that virus to the surface and there's an eruption. So there's different ways in which it's coming out of your body and you're much more contagious then, right?
Chickenpox. Oh, that was something.
Now, speaking of chickenpox, you might have also heard that when people got sick with coronavirus, especially Delta, all of a sudden things like chickenpox were coming out. Right?
Really?
Yep. And other viruses. And that's because your body is stressed, your immune system is weakened, and viruses like chickenpox or Epstein-Barr, which causes like mono or cytomegalovirus, these things that cause these long-term illnesses, they stay dormant and hide within your nervous system tissue. And
Okay,
when your body
yes.
gets stressed enough, it
Mhm.
comes out. And typically, when someone gets stressed who used to have chickenpox, what comes out is shingles,
Yeah.
which is another
Mhm.
version of the same virus.
Sure.
The way COVID acts on your cells, because it breaks down your cells' defenses, and you have the strong cytokine reaction that goes on, that's actually causing the original virus to come back out. So chickenpox can come out again.
Hmm.
Or Epstein-Barr can come out again, which causes chronic fatigue syndrome and mono, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot of people all of a sudden saying, whoa, I've got this too. What's going on? It's actually that's been in your body. It's just rearing its ugly head again because you're so weak.
Yeah, I even noticed I was getting rashes for
Yeah,
quite a while afterwards.
right. Because your body, a
Um,
rash is just another way your body expels a virus, right?
right. Rosacea
Yeah.
really reared its ugly head.
And it's also a sign that your inflammation levels were way up.
Yeah.
And so your immune system was at a disadvantage because now it's trying to deal with the byproducts of inflammation and heal you from that damage.
Mhm.
And so rashes are a very common thing to come up. Another way I see that all the time is like eczema, which
Yeah.
indicates there's a lot of inflammation in your intestinal system. And when
Okay.
your gut's inflamed, it comes out through the skin. The skin is a window to this inflammation in your gut. And when you're sick, dealing with Omicron and anything else, your gut's very involved because 70% of your immune system lives there. And it
Okay.
controls 90% of your entire immune response. And
Mhm.
so gut health is extremely important against any virus, including the coronaviruses we're talking about right now.
Right.
So we were talking about spreading. And what's interesting
Yeah.
about that too is originally we saw that it took longer for these earlier versions to spread from one person to another, for you to be contagious. And like I said, you can, with Omicron, infect 10 other people, but how fast can you do that? Well, with the original strain, Alpha, it took about 8 days of you having that in your body with a high viral load to reach enough of a level for you to spread it to someone.
Okay.
All right. And you typically became symptomatic after about 4 days with that. So about half the time it was mounting, about half the time it became symptomatic, and then you really started spreading it. With Delta, that 8 days went down to about 4 to 6 days. So after you got that or contracted that from someone, they offered it, you accepted it, you took it into your body, your cells got latched onto. Well, that would have to go on for about 4 to 6 days before you could then make enough spikes that you spit out to spread it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Well, Omicron's about 2 days.
Wow.
Okay. So when you get it, it takes about 2 days to incubate. Then you become sick with the symptoms,
Yeah.
right? And we're using the term sick loosely here. I'm using sick to mean symptomatic, but the reality is symptoms do not equal sickness, right? And I think we talked about that before,
We have.
right? Think about cancer, think about heart disease. You have no symptoms, but you are sick.
Yeah.
Okay. So symptoms mean an expression. Your body's fighting, your immune system is doing something, it's trying to expel something.
Yeah.
Right. And these symptoms are part of the cure. You have to go through that for your body to get rid of it. Right. And sometimes the more intense that fight is, the worse you feel. That means the harder you're fighting. Okay. So that can be elusive.
I was fighting really hard then.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So I do a lot to protect my immune system. I'm not saying I'll never have a symptom, right? Because if my immune system is fighting something off the way it's supposed to, I'll get symptomatic.
Yeah,
Now,
right.
if my
Yeah,
immune
you had
system,
said that, right?
right?
You
So if my immune system is pretty strong, I'll fight off most things and I won't even know it even happened,
Mhm.
right? But there's, I'm not Superman. There's always something that might overpower me. And there might be, even though I do a pretty specific daily regimen of nutrients to keep my immune system up, I get my chiropractic adjustments, which have been shown in literature to create a better immune response in your body. I do these things regularly. I do everything in my biohack zone, which reduces my stress, increases the oxygen flow, all kinds of great things. But I could come up against a really nasty bug that overpowers me because maybe it was a few days in a row I didn't sleep well. Maybe I decide, hey, I've earned the right to go out and eat some crappy food, right? Which happens on occasion,
I was gonna say, do you
right?
ever?
Of course, right? Everybody's human.
Come on, what's your go-to?
Well, I might break down and add a sugar cube to my coffee,
No way. I don't believe you. I
right?
think you'd get the sugar in the brown, sugar in the raw. I don't
Yeah,
think you
yeah.
put it.
So if I'm going
Yeah,
to use sugar, I use organic sugar.
yeah,
And if I'm
exactly.
going to use sugar, I actually use organic coconut sugar
I was gonna
is what I
say.
use. It's less sweet, right?
That's you being bad.
That's me being bad, right? I allow myself to have that in my coffee once a week,
Oh,
right? So a little bit of that in my
yeah,
coffee once a week, but the rest of the time I'm going to use stevia or monk fruit as
yeah,
a sweetener in my coffee, which doesn't have that negative inflammatory response. But you know what? Enjoy life. It's
yeah.
short. Just do the right thing most of the time. I'm not telling you to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. Don't drive yourself crazy with it, but do the right thing 90% of the time so you can enjoy the 10% without feeling guilty and without killing yourself.
Do you have
Right?
cocktails?
Girl, an old fashioned is my weakness,
Just
right?
say it. All
So
right.
again, I try to
Okay.
control that, right? So I'm going to have a 1 or 2 drink limit, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to do that maybe a couple of times a month, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Now, that's what I should do. Do I sometimes slip from that? Sure. Do you get to a party around friends before you know it, like, oh, I'm on drink number 4. I'm going to hit the couch, right? Does it happen? Of course it happens. It happens to
Sure.
everybody, right? But let's be realistic about it. Like I said, try to take care of yourself most of the time. When I make my old fashioned, I use my own mix I make with that. That's all organic, right? And I'm going to use honey in there actually instead of a lot of white sugar. For if anyone knows how to make an old fashioned, there's usually sugar cubes in it. So I'm going to do the best I can to make it a clean drink. If I have a margarita, I want a skinny margarita. I don't want this margarita
Yeah.
mix with lots of crap in it, artificial colors and flavors and sweeteners. I'm
Right.
going to add pure agave syrup, right? And lime juice and pure tequila, which has very little impact on your glycemic index and glycemic load, and your inflammation levels are actually fairly low for that.
Mhm.
Is that great for my liver? If I have 1, it's okay. If I have more than that, I'm going to start to toss it the other way, and the more I have, the worse it is. I'm well aware of, the downside to all these things, but I'm also aware of the fact that it's part of enjoying life, and let's do it within reason.
Yeah.
The old saying is everything within moderation. I don't think that counts for heroin and cocaine, but you draw a line somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that being said, you don't have to be perfect all the time. Just be perfect most of the time,
Sure.
and then you'll be well protected. Okay, but you can still be overpowered. So just because you have symptoms doesn't mean, oh, I failed. All the things I was doing to keep myself well didn't work. Look, I got sick. Well, did you get Delta and live? Guess what? You succeeded.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
because a lot of people didn't.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you get Delta and don't live, your immune system didn't do its job.
Sure.
Okay. And 85% of the time, that meant you were already sick. Now, that's all the things that we know about, the diagnosed diseases, the comorbidities that they keep talking about.
Mhm.
Well, how about those things that are the unspoken commonalities that we're seeing across the board of people who don't have those diagnoses? People we would call, air quotes, healthy,
Mhm.
right? So how do we say, oh my God, it doesn't matter what you do. Look, healthy people are dying from it, right? Well, that's not true. They're unhealthy and don't know it. All right. Just like the person with heart disease building, just like the person with cancer building, they're unhealthy and don't know it unless you look for it. You don't find what you don't look for.
Right.
Right. So I looked and I said, okay, so what does the research show are the commonalities that aren't really being spoken about by doctors, aren't being spoken about by the CDC, aren't being spoken about on TV? You're not going to hear about them anywhere, but you hear about them right here on VTalks
Yes,
because
we
we
do.
are cutting edge,
Yes, we are.
right? And we're going
We're
to
rock
talk about
stars.
what no one else is talking about. And we've covered some of these topics already, but when you look at the research, it was no surprise to me that there are 4 commonalities across the board that are being unspoken, that are being found across people who don't do well with COVID. Okay. And these are 4 things that you can change. That if you do succumb to the remaining Delta variants or Omicron or whatever the next one is, what things can we change to make sure that we are stronger no matter what? Right. And number 1 is our vitamin D status. And we talked about this before, and we've done a whole topic on this, so I won't go into a lot of detail about it. But just remember, vitamin D is the general that commands your immune army. And the regular lab ranges are 30 to 100. And they don't really start to tell you there's a problem till you're below 30. Well, let me tell you something. That's a big problem. If you're below 30, your immune system is not up to par. All right. And vitamin D is necessary for a lot of functions in your body. It's a steroid hormone. It's a controlling hormone. It activates your immune system and controls and regulates your immune system on many different levels. And for me and my patients, I want you between 50 and 75.
Regarding vitamin D, so I always encourage people to take it, and they say, well, I'm out in the sun all the time.
Right.
I don't need it.
Yeah.
What's your response to that?
So yes, you do make vitamin D from the sun, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, how much sun exposure you're getting,
Mm-hmm.
on what percentage of your body's tissues, at what time of year, and where in the country do you live?
Mm-hmm.
These all make a difference, right?
How about sunscreen?
And sunscreen blocks your production of vitamin D.
How about sunglasses?
So sunglasses, I recommend, are actually a good thing. However, you do need to actually look at visible sunlight in order to properly set your circadian rhythms. So the best time to do that is not midday when the sun's really bright and you stare at the sun and now you can't see. That's not a genius thing to do, right?
Okay.
But when the sun is rising, that's an ideal time to look at the sun. And when you do that, you might notice that the sky is going from dark to blue, right? As the sun's coming up, we're starting to see that sky get bluer and bluer. And part of that is because the majority of the light rays that are being expressed at that point in the light spectrum include a lot of blue light. They're refracting off water crystals in the atmosphere that makes the sky then look blue, right? But that blue light is coming off, and blue light signals your cells through your eyes. You have a section on your retina that's specific to this, to the different color of light spectrum that activates your circadian rhythms and your hormone balance that goes along with it. And what's interesting is it's located in the bottom of your retina. So as the rays are coming down from above down, they hit that part of your retina. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that kind of light, blue light, activates your cortisol, which is your get up and go hormone, your stress response hormone, your wake up, it's daytime hormone. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons why we should not have light on when we're trying to sleep. Because any light that hits your eyes is going to activate that hormone and wake you up.
Okay.
Especially blue light, right?
Okay.
That's why they say get off your phone at least an hour. Turn off your TV at least an hour before you go to bed to lower that stress hormone. Mm-hmm. Now, in the evening, as the sun's going down, we notice the sky typically starts to go from blue to more of a reddish color at the sunset, right? And stays a little bit more in that kind of orangey glow before it goes dark again. The red spectrum has the opposite side, the blue spectrum, and that causes your body to lower cortisol and secrete melatonin, which starts to induce your sleep cycles, right? And it's also interesting that that's the same light spectrum that comes out of natural fire. And you might notice that sitting around a fire pit makes you feel calm.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Because that light is coming typically from below up, and those receptors are in the upper part and gets picked up by that. And that starts to actually make your body go into a little bit more of a calming, soothing sleep cycle. Mm-hmm. Okay? So it's pretty cool the way our body works, right? We've adapted very well to this world and universe we live in, and our body has adapted to how these light energies come in, and we use them in different ways, right? So sunglasses can be beneficial to block some negative rays that might be damaging to your retina, but you do want to have, when that light is not too bright, you want to keep your sunglasses off so you are absorbing those light rays.
Is it possible, though, to get enough vitamin D just naturally?
So the problem here is with vitamin D, you have to have about 50 to 75% of your body's tissues exposed So you'd have to have your entire torso exposed to the sun, right? Which is okay in the summertime if you're wearing a bikini, but not so great in the wintertime,
No.
right? And you have to be in that sun at a high apex, so midday, and it has to be at a time where the sun's rays are strong, so typically the summer, or you have to live in a part of the world where the sun is strong all the time, like below the equator, or at least in the United States, you have to live below, basically it's a band that kind of goes on a swoop, not straight across the country, but like a hammock, and you have to live below that in those real southern states to have more of that particular ray come out of the sun to create the vitamin D. Now, if all those are just right, the majority of your body's skin is exposed, the sun is high in the sky, it's a very strong sun ray, midsummer or below the equator, then within about 15 minutes, you've created about enough vitamin D that you need for that day.
Okay.
If all those criteria are not being met, you're probably not creating enough vitamin D. Now, vitamin D gets used up the more stressed you are, which is one of the reasons why we're seeing so many people with so much low vitamin D. We're a stressed out society that spends 80% of our time indoors.
Yeah.
Right? So we're not being exposed. And even when we're driving the car, the glass blocks the rays. Right? You notice you don't get a sunburn when the window's up?
Yeah.
Right? So that's a problem.
Yeah.
Right? So we are no longer a society that spends all our time outside hunting and gathering and farming. We're all inside now. So there's a massive change in our vitamin D output, and it causes lots of health problems. So we want you up around 50 to 75. Now, if one of my patients is actually fighting something serious like cancer, I want you up around 100. Right?
Really?
Now, you can overdose on vitamin D, but it takes quite a lot, and you'd have to hit up around 300.
Yeah.
To really start causing neurologic damage that mimics MS.
Okay.
Right? So it's not likely you would do that. All right.
Yeah, it would be tough.
If you are supplementing vitamin D, you need to check your blood levels at least every 6 months to know where you're at. All right. Because I'm not so worried about you overdosing as I am worried about underdosing. And the amount you're taking may not be enough or may not be getting into your cells. So if I have someone I put on a high dose of vitamin D, which should always be combined, by the way, with magnesium and vitamin K, right, for better absorption. And vitamin D needs to get carried and transported into your cells and into your body, and it uses omega-3 fatty acids for that. There's things like fish oil, and we're going to talk about omega-3s in a moment, right? It's going to go right along with this. So that's necessary for importing the vitamin D. So you can have lots going in your mouth that's not getting anywhere.
Right.
If you don't have these proper cofactors. So if I have a patient supplementing and then I check their blood work and it really hasn't budged, I know they're missing a cofactor. So then we have to increase their omega-3s, make sure they're getting the magnesium and vitamin K, and that these things are getting this into their body properly, right? Another thing we want to look at is that vitamin D that comes from the sun comes in the form of vitamin D2 in our cells, in our tissues, and that is not the kind your cells can use. So it has to be converted into D3. Now, a lot of people are supplementing directly with D3 now because we know that now, and it used to be D2, but now almost all your supplements are D3. But if you're getting it from the sun, it still has to be converted to D3. That conversion takes place in your liver and your kidneys, also in some of your fat cells. And there are other factors that need to be present for that to happen, other nutrients. And there needs to be a healthy liver, healthy intestines, healthy kidneys for this to take place, right? So if I see that even with the proper cofactors, this person's D is still not going up in their body, then I'm going to measure a different kind of vitamin D called 125 hydroxycholecalciferol in their bloodstream, right? Now that's the kind that tells me, is the liver working? Are the kidneys working to convert it? If I see a problem there, I'm not going to give them any more vitamin D. I'm going to help support their liver and kidneys. And when we do that, all of a sudden, shoom, I see that vitamin D go right up because now the conversion's happening.
Wow.
So there's a number of factors that go into all this. And if you're not under a doctor's guidance, start by taking vitamin D3 and hope for the best. But get your baseline levels checked and then check again in 6 months. And if they're dramatically going up, you're doing okay. If they're not, you got to find out why not. So,
and then they call you.
Right.
Because they may not get the answer at their
Yeah,
primary
unfortunately, I
care.
find that their typical doctor doesn't really know a lot about nutrition, right?
Yeah.
Your average doctor
Yeah.
doesn't. And in med school, your average doctor gets about a weekend seminar on nutrition
Yeah.
and doesn't get to cover a whole lot of these bases unless that doctor is particularly interested in nutrition, right? And then I'm not saying all doctors don't know this, but I find that most of my patients tell me my doctor didn't know anything about this, just told me to take vitamin D and didn't know what to do, just told me to take more. Well, if it wasn't working at first, it's not going to work by taking more,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So the next thing I want to talk about is that those omega-3s, you need to transport that vitamin D. So we found that one of the things across the board for people who succumbed to COVID that looked healthy was their vitamin D was low. Number two was their omega-3 level was low, right? And you're raising your hand because we had that episode where we went over your omega-3 test that we had run through my office. And I said, whoa, Veronica, not only are you low, but you're so low that you're open to infection. Your cell defenses are down because
And
of
I was wanting to cough. When
right?
you said that, I thought it was in my head. What
And
happened? I
right,
had COVID.
the next day, boom, right there you were. We just talked about it, and there you were because I saw that your resistance was down, and we didn't have enough time to bring it up at that point because it takes about 3 months to get this back up.
Yeah.
And you were already infected, didn't even know it. And it just so happened that we just were pointing it out that day. Your defenses were down, you're open to infection, and you already were. And the next day, you ended up in trouble.
And how sick did I get?
You were in the hospital, right?
2 times.
2 times, right? So we've been working on building you back up since then, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right?
I don't miss. I tell people all the time, you have to take your omega-3s. And it was interesting because they recognized that in the hospital. They told me in the hospital, they did tests and they said your omega-3s are very low. So that was actually encouraging that the
I'm
doctors,
really happy to hear that because
right?
I was not hearing that before. Maybe someone else is actually reading the literature. That's exciting to
Yeah.
me.
No, I think that's the first time anyone even brought it to my attention. So I was happy to hear that too, but it is so true.
So
And the
that is another
omega-3s.
thing,
Yeah.
right, that we saw as a definite factor that led to people doing really poorly with COVID. And I'm glad you pulled through, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of other people didn't.
Right.
And the reason it didn't was their omega-3s were too low. And that
Right.
causes a couple of different problems. One is you can't transport the vitamin D and use it. So that's one thing right there. The other thing is the omega-3s themselves make up your cell membranes, which is your defense mechanism. It's your skin of your cell. It's your front door. It's the walls. It's the roof. And if that's got holes in it, you're open for trouble, right?
Such a great example when you say it's like your front door is unlocked.
Yeah,
You know,
that's exactly right.
you
And
you know, it's a crapshoot, right?
right,
Bad
the
guys
front
can
door-
get in. You might have an arsenal of, weapons, but
if they
if
get
they
in
get
and
in the
surprise
door,
you,
then it's anybody could win that fight.
right.
Yeah.
And if your vitamin D is down and your omega-3s is down, and the other things we're about to talk about are in the scenario, not only is your front door unlocked, but you just moved into the worst neighborhood in town,
Right.
right?
Right.
So you have roving gangs just looking for an opportunity. They're checking all the car doors. They're checking all the house doors. And look, yours is open. Party
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So besides omega-3s, the next commonality we saw across the board, you pull one up and I'll go for it. Visceral fat. That's exactly what I was thinking. You read my mind. So what the heck is visceral fat? Well, viscera means organs. And visceral fat is the fat that builds up inside around your organs that you can't see from the outside. And the scary thing about visceral fat is you could be skinny as a rail and have very little fat on the outside and have lots of visceral fat inside. We call that TOFI, thin outside, fat inside. TOFI.
Interesting.
It's also called skinny fat.
Yes.
Okay. So it's interesting to me that I have a tool that measures visceral fat in my office. And so I look at this for people to see, okay, typically an elevated visceral fat means that you've had long-term cellular inflammation in your body that has led to the growth of abnormal fat that your body could not process. And that fat is holding on to toxins and excess sugar that you couldn't metabolize. and it has to go somewhere. So your body starts packing it on, but it packs it on back inside around your organs. Now, we're supposed to have a little bit of visceral fat. That's a layer of cushioning around our organs that's supposed to be there. If you had a bad fall off a roof, we don't want your kidneys to fracture.
Sure.
Right? So we need to have that layer of fat to absorb that. And that healthy level on a visceral fat meter is anywhere between 1 and 7. We call that okay. Between 7 and 9 indicates you're starting to build up more visceral fat than you're supposed to have. And that's going to start to predispose you for trouble, right? The writing's on the wall. Now, if we were talking about diabetes and you look at your blood sugar levels, we look at something called hemoglobin A1C, which is an average of your blood sugar over time. Well, we look at that to say, is someone diabetic or not? And they don't just suddenly become diabetic. They first go into a phase we call pre-diabetic, right? And that pre-diabetic means something's up. This is not normal. You've gone beyond normal. You're not quite diagnosed yet, but trouble's brewing.
Yeah.
Well, that visceral fat in the level of 7 to 9 is the equivalent of pre-diabetes for blood sugar,
Okay.
right? Your pre-lethal visceral fat, if we want to call it that way, pre-diagnostic visceral fat. The reason I say lethal is the greater that builds, the more deadly it becomes. All right. Now, if you go between 9 and 13, that's considered pretty high, right? And that means that disease is forming now. Heart disease, kidney disease, liver disease, intestinal disease. If you go above 13, you're very high visceral fat. And that means you're about 300 to 400% more likely. That means 400 times more likely to die of a heart attack than someone that's normal. Okay, that's huge. Well, that visceral fat doesn't just predispose you to heart attack, to kidney disease, to liver disease. It also predisposes you to infection, because visceral fat, once it starts getting above 9, starts making new chemistry that changes your physiology and weakens your immune system and does things like raise your blood pressure, right? And that's one of the reasons why we saw hypertension was 1/3 of all cases of comorbidities of people who died. The one thing they had in common was hypertension. Well, was the high blood pressure so deadly? Not as much as what was causing the high blood pressure. And one of the things that causes the high blood pressure is visceral fat. You don't even have to be heavy on the outside. We all know skinny people with high blood pressure. Right?
I almost think we should do a show on this.
Yeah, we certainly can.
Really?
Right? Because we can go into a lot of detail about this.
Yeah.
All right.
Can you, so how do you get rid of visceral fat?
So there are specific ways of eating and exercising.
Mhm.
Okay. And step 1 is reducing that inflammatory state of your body.
Okay.
Things we talked about over and over. So basically, you want to make your visceral fat better? Watch our last 11 episodes. Right? Because we're basically going to talk about everything. Now, there's very practical ways I can tell you to apply that information, and we can do an episode on that. But
we've done this for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have.
So all the things we talked about here relate to that visceral fat buildup, right?
Right.
Now, one of the chemicals that visceral fat makes raises your blood pressure. Now, why would it do that? Well, it's kind of crazy because it's almost like it's alive and it's actually becoming an organ or gland in and of itself. So once the visceral fat reaches that level that is creating these new chemicals and hormones, it technically has become a new gland in your body. So it's a gland that doesn't belong, and it secretes negative hormones that break you down. So the visceral fat itself needs blood to survive, but it's not a real organ or gland, so it doesn't have any of its own blood vessels. So how's it going to get blood? Well, it's smart enough. These fat cells have an intelligence that come together to create hormones, which are signaling molecules that tell your blood vessels to squeeze and constrict.
What?
And when they vasoconstrict like that, blood vessels are porous. They're like cheesecloth, right? If the pressure gets high enough, the blood's going to start to squeeze through the walls. So if you squeeze and constrict and that pressure then rises because the smaller lumen or opening doesn't let it through, it's going to squeeze that blood out and then it showers down over the fat and feeds it.
What?
How scary is that?
Very scary.
Very scary. right? Very scary.
How
It
do we
has its
make
own
this
skeleton.
stop?
How do you make it stop? You get rid of the visceral fat by lowering the inflammation. Are we seeing a recurring theme here? Right? This is why I am a cellular inflammation and toxicity specialist. This is why I'm a cellular healing specialist, because it all comes down to that.
Wow.
It can spread in different ways and cause other problems in your body, but it all comes down to cellular inflammation, including the formation of visceral fat, which will raise your risk dramatically of dying from COVID or any virus. Okay. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about here, we've got 9 minutes left in our podcast, is something that we've talked about before, which drove me absolutely crazy from day one. And you may remember my background, my undergraduate work is in psychophysiology, the brain-body connection. And I studied intently the effects of fear and anxiety on your body's physiology, on your health and wellness, on your stress response, on your immune response. And I've gone so far as my latest functional medicine program is called the Stress Defense Health Restore Program. So for that very particular purpose, I want to reset your body's physiological stress response, because the overwhelming fear and anxiety that we have been fed over and over and over everywhere you turn for the last couple of years has dramatically impacted your survival rate. So in more than 1/3 of all cases, regardless of other comorbidities, regardless of whether we thought they were healthy or well, were people who were either clinically diagnosed as suffering from excessive fear or anxiety, or when asked, were self-diagnosed and said, I'm extremely fearful, I have high anxiety, and I've had it for a long time. So it's not that we can't have a short-term fear response, that's a normal response, but chronic fear, chronic anxiety, that which lasts more than 3 months, and we're almost going into 3 years, right? That which lasts more than 3 months dramatically changes your stress response, your immune response, and the chemicals and hormones your body is producing. It raises that stress hormone of cortisol into a very dangerous level. It raises your cytokines tremendously. And COVID creates a cytokine storm. So if you have more cytokines, and guess what else makes your cytokines? Your abdominal fat. So if you have more abdominal fat, more fear and anxiety, you're going to make more cytokines. Cytokines are biochemicals, proteins, that your immune system uses to fight the good fight. But when it overwhelms and you get a flood of cytokines beyond the norm, then they cause damage. That's what we call a cytokine storm. And you probably heard that term over and over in regard to COVID, because it was saying people's lungs are being destroyed by the cytokine storm.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have excess abdominal fat, if you have excess fear and anxiety, have them together, you're really in trouble.
Yeah.
Then your vitamin D level's low and you don't have your omega-3s. Yeah. I'm really, really worried about that person.
Yeah.
Right? So that brings it all together. I mean, it blew my mind when I saw the research that said 1/3 of all deaths were people with diagnosed fear and anxiety. Our government should be ashamed of what we allow across our media, of what our CDC pumps out there and encourages the media to say. Have you ever once heard a news report saying, increase your vitamin D, get better omega-3s? This isn't new information. They know this. They've known this for a long, long time.
Yeah, but that's not as much fun to watch.
It's not. It's not nearly as scary, and scary breeds ratings.
Right.
Right? And I don't want to sound
all about money
or anything, but it is all about money.
Yeah.
And they don't want to tell you there's a natural way to protect yourself. They want you to believe the only answer is a drug. Right? The pharmaceutical industry rules the media. That's where all the money comes from. Look at the number of pharmaceutical commercials you see on TV. Look at Dateline, brought to you by Pfizer. Look at, you know what I mean? So where do you think the message is going to be? Right? It's going to be in line with the pharmaceutical companies. And the pharmaceutical companies are there to sell you something. That's their job. They're not there to help you get better. They're there to sell you something. As a matter of fact, the longer you stay sick, the wealthier they become.
Yeah.
Right? It's a really backwards, crappy system. I'm not saying that drugs don't serve a purpose. Don't get me wrong. They're absolutely great for crisis care, but they're horrible when it comes to healthcare.
Yeah.
Right? And all the massive information campaigns that get propagated on the public are canned, planned marketing pieces from pharmaceutical companies and the other interests that benefit from the pharmaceutical companies, right? Most of your politicians get funded by pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
They're the largest lobbying group there is, right? So if politicians are going to say, hey, I'm in favor of you taking this drug or doing this, that they're getting paid one way or another to do so, right? There's not a lot going on in our self-interest. You have to take care of your self-interest. You have to follow the things we're telling you here on V-Talks, on these episodes, to take care of yourself. Because if you don't, Uncle Sam is not in the corner. I'm sorry, right?
It's so true.
And I hope that, what I'm saying here doesn't get banned as, hey, you broke the golden rule. You're not allowed.
We'll find out, because then we'll be in Facebook jail.
Right. And I've been there. Right? I've been there for printing an exact page from research, not from me, from a journal of epidemiology and the Journal of Infectious Disease. I said, hey, look at this. This is really interesting. This says, right, Facebook banned me. So I was spreading misinformation. I said, from a public peer-reviewed journal, that's misinformation. What are you using?
So was that a 30-day?
Well, it was really funny. I got massive slaps on the wrist, right?
Okay.
And they said, this is misinformation. And they said I could, and they said, when you clicked on what it said I was saying, it said I was saying that vaccines cause infertility. I said nothing about that. That was not the topic of my post. It had nothing to do with that. Now, that may or may not be true, remains to be seen. There's some evidence that points to that. That's a whole other topic. We don't know. But the point is,
we'll see what happens. We'll see how long this podcast gets to stay up.
It just cracked me up that they said that was the reason they banned me. I said, where did I ever say anything about that? So then it said I could appeal, because now I don't want my reputation tarnished.
No,
right?
Of course not.
And I don't want them to ban me, because honestly, Facebook and social media and Instagram is part of Facebook and Twitter and everything else.
Well, I don't want to get banned. I have a media company and clients, so we want to not get banned.
And that's how we get our information out. But we're not saying anything crazy, right? We're not. I'm saying things that are available to anyone in the published medical literature if you just look, right?
So, and the other thing is, if people want more information, they can go to your website at
drwildcanhelp.com. I thought that's kind of the easiest way to say it, because a lot of people say, can you help? I say, well, yeah, I can. So Dr. Wild can help, because I do believe I can help just about anybody be healthier than they are.
Absolutely.
Right? Now, there are some situations that obviously are beyond my control.
Sorry, somebody just posted Facebook jail repeat offender right here.
Right.
I didn't post all these comments because I was afraid if I did, I would, the whole podcast would get shut down. So I'm just letting them comment. They can comment all they want. I just didn't post them up here.
And that's I think it's a really sad day when our freedom of speech has really been taken away.
Yeah.
And it really bothers me that you're not allowed to question, because isn't that
that's it, right? You're not allowed to question.
Isn't that the foundation of science? When someone says you don't trust the science, I said the definition of science is not trusting, because science means further investigation, further study, always looking deeper to know more. Now, if you're just going to take something at face value without ever questioning it, that's not science. That is anti-science. That is the antithesis of science. That is akin to belief. Now, you can believe whatever you want, but if you want to look for proof, you have to ask questions. And if something doesn't seem like it's adding up, that's the time to ask questions, right? But in this whole ordeal, the ability to ask questions has been banned. That's scary to me. Isn't that part of what we say our country was founded on, was free speech, the ability to ask questions, right? And we did it for religious reasons, but we didn't stop there. We said, speak your piece as long as you're not hurting someone. Now, that's where they're saying the problem is. They're saying that your opinion's hurting someone. I beg to differ. I think your opinion's hurting someone, right? But I'm open enough to say, and you're allowed to have your opinion.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah. I
Well,
mean, and in this situation, everyone's just trying to get through it. And, we're trying, a lot of people are getting all their information on the media. They don't know where to turn. A lot of people don't have answers for them. They're they're afraid,
well, let me
you know.
just finish up in the last minute here to say that I understand what you're saying absolutely, because people come to me all the time and say, I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to trust,
Mhm.
what to believe. And I
Yeah.
say, well, I can only speak out of my experience.
Yeah.
And out of my experience, I know these things to be true. And I know how to help certain things. And I know the outcome to be true. And
Yeah.
so if you're looking for help, Dr. Weil can help, right?
Well, you've certainly helped me and several of my friends. There's absolutely no question. And the tests that you have that are available are so detailed and so different from anything you can get at the doctors and affordable.
Yeah. Right.
You know,
Literally it starts as little as $20 for
yeah.
certain tests I do. And
I
it
think
goes
I
for
have one
information.
out. I know I sent mine in, my last one, the big one.
Right. And I'm looking for the results of those any day now.
Yeah,
Right?
I'm very curious about that one.
And if you're okay with it, we'll go over the results on air if you want.
Oh, sure. What do I
Just so we
care?
can
Whatever.
we can air all your dirty laundry,
Everybody knows everything about me now.
right?
It doesn't matter. Though I
Speaking
wanna do
of,
this visceral fat thing.
yeah,
I wanna do a
absolutely.
show on that
And I'll tell you
because
how
that's interesting.
that's really important. And I can
Mhm.
tell you how to measure that. And I can tell you how to improve that. And so that's something we definitely want to do.
I
So,
have another question too,
yeah,
because you were talking, I didn't wanna interrupt you,
yeah,
but, since inflammation seems to be, um, the key here, do you have a test that's specific to test your inflammation?
I do. Actually, I have two,
Okay.
three. I actually have three. So that
Alright.
$20 test I was talking about, that is a urinalysis. And that's even something that I can mail you as a test kit. All these test kits I can mail to you and you can do from home. I have
'Cause
clients,
I wanna
patients
test
around
my
the country.
inflammation.
Right.
Okay.
So there is a systemic inflammation screening test that we can do,
Okay.
and it's done with a urinalysis. And what it does is when your cell membranes are becoming inflamed, remember we said that your membranes are made up of fats?
Mhm.
When the membranes become inflamed, what happens when you put a flame near a fat? It
Yeah.
melts, right?
Yeah.
So when your cell membranes start melting, as those fats melt, they turn into a chemical called malondialdehyde.
Okay.
And once the cell melts enough, the membrane ruptures and the cell dies, and the malondialdehyde ends up in your blood and then in your urine. And we measure it with that urinalysis. And so we are expecting a very low amount of that to be present from normal cell turnover. But if we see that really dramatically high, we know there's a massive amount of cell death due to inflammation in your body. It doesn't tell us where it's coming from, but it says, yep, something's happening. You better get on it. So
Well, if
then,
you've had COVID,
yeah, right, you can have
vaccines.
recurrent, right? We're here about the long COVID, long haul.
Yeah.
The belief there is that this is recurrent chronic inflammation and the chronic presence of spike proteins, whether
Mhm.
you got them from having COVID or from the vaccine, which
'Cause
produced
you
a
can
lot
get
of
a
spike protein.
vaccine, right? You can
Right,
get the inflammation.
right. And that's why
Okay.
we're seeing as many of the side effects of the vaccines we're seeing that, again, are not being reported. But if you go look at VAERS, which is the government's own reporting system, vaccine
Mhm.
adverse event reporting system, there are now over 1 million reports of significant adverse events, right? So you can't tell me this is coincidence. This is hundreds, if not 1,000 times more reported adverse events than all other vaccines we've ever used in history combined. Okay. So there's definitely inflammation. And I directly know multiple people who had severe immediate reactions, heart stopping, severe neurologic consequences,
Yeah.
numbness and tingling of their arms, inability to stand up, inability to stay conscious, all kinds of things. I actually went to Target to pick up toothpaste, and they were having a vaccine clinic, and they gave a guy a shot, and boom, he went out, passed out, down on the floor. They had to bring him back up to about 15 minutes. I stood by. They revived him, brought him back up, and yeah, Ralphie's even angry about this entire thing.
Oh, Ralph, he's so
But
cute.
I was watching it right in front of my eyes, and they said, "Wow, you must have had a massive anxiety attack." And he said, I wasn't anxious at all. I've gotten lots of shots before. I don't know what happened to me. I've never had that happen before. Right.
Right.
So I don't know what happened to him, but there was one example right in front of my face. Right.
Yeah.
So that was scary to watch. I don't know. I don't really know what's going on. I don't really know what the real amount of damage may be. But the reality is the vaccine is designed to make your cells make spike proteins, which is the toxic component of the virus that we're trying to avoid. Right?
So you have tests for the inflammation.
Right. So if you test positive on that screening, then we would have you do that cell inflammation finger prick test that we did with you. And that talks about the omega-3s, the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, the arachidonic acid to EPA ratio. And those are all telling us about your cellular inflammation directly. And that's a $99 test, including my consultation and telling you how to fix it.
Well, because what I'd like to do is I'd like to do the inflammation test and then retest.
Right.
To see where we're at, because I think that test was pre-COVID. So now I've had COVID and vaccines.
And so we want to see what a new test.
I want to see what's going on there. And then the visceral fat.
My dogs are wrestling. Sorry.
I know, that's okay. So is there a test for the visceral fat?
So there's not a test for the visceral fat other than the use of a particular tool that measures an electrical signal that goes through your body.
Oh.
Okay. So when we do that episode, I can tell you where to get one of those and how to do that.
Yeah. Who wants to take that test?
Everybody.
I know.
Right. The highest visceral fat.
I'm afraid of that test.
Listen to this. The highest visceral fat I ever read was on a patient of mine who was a competitive bodybuilding Navy SEAL.
What?
The guy was ripped, looked fantastic. And he had the highest visceral fat I ever read. So how could that be? Well, that was because within the Navy SEALs, his job was to handle explosives. So he was around toxic material all the time.
Wow,
now, he maintained his diet and exercise to a point that he kept lean and trim on the outside. And more than that, he was cut and ripped. Okay. But that fat had to go somewhere. So it went inside around his organs.
Okay.
So even though he looked great on the outside, he was at tremendous risk of heart attack, kidney disease, liver disease. So we had to do a lot of work quick. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a guy that you go, he just dropped dead, but he was perfectly healthy. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Now, I said there were 3 tests. The very last test is we did that cell inflammation version on you of your body cells. There's one that also does body and brain. Okay. So if you have any concern about dementia, if Alzheimer's runs in the family, you want to see, are you predisposed? Are you already going in that direction? What can you do to turn it around? That test tells me that. And you can turn it around.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I want to order those tests. So why don't you tell us all exactly how that's done?
So it's super easy. You go to that website that you see going across the ticker, drwildcanhelp.com. Mm-hmm. You go to book a service and you scroll down the service menu, and all my services are broken down to categories. So initially all the services say chiropractic, then they say functional medicine, then they say biohacking. So in the functional medicine, you're going to see it says cellular health and inflammation test, $99. Or it says systemic inflammation screening, urinalysis, $20. Or it says brain and body inflammation test, and that's $199. So those are all test kits that I can mail out to you. You do the test at home. It tells you exactly how to do it. I get the results. We have a consultation. I show you exactly what the results are. I give you a written report, and I tell you exactly how to change it. And I ask you to make all those changes, and we retest you ideally in 3 months, and we should see significant improvement in all areas.
And Michael, do you recommend that people call with the free consult first so they can figure out like what tests maybe that they need?
Absolutely. So if you have any questions about what's right for me, where do I go? Where do I start? When you first go to that website, the first thing you're going to see is a blue box right in the first screen. It says book a free phone consult. Okay. I'll always give you 15 minutes to pick my brain and tell me what's going on. And for me to tell you, do I think I can help you? And if I don't, I'm going to try to refer you to somebody who can. And if I think I can help you, where do we start?
Right.
And that's always really the first step, unless you think you know right away what you want to start with.
Yeah. So much information. I feel so smart.
You are so smart,
I now that I know we've been together a year doing this, I must be a little smarter.
right? It's going into osmosis.
I'm a little smarter. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Really, I always enjoy having you here, and I know my mom was watching. I do, because
Absolutely.
she would say, "Oh, the doctor is on." She would get all excited and she'd watch. So
Well, that makes me happy.
yes, yes. And you've got Ralphie there. So Ralphie, I'll see you
Ralphie
later, buddy.
and my big boy Knight. Knight's
Yeah.
causing
And
really
Night,
Knight's being needy right now.
I know. But listen, thank you so much. And like my mom said, if we help one person, it's worth it.
That's always what I say. I
Yeah.
I was at a holistic health expo this weekend here in town, and I gave a presentation there.
Yeah.
And someone said, "Do you think you'll have a packed room?" I said, "It doesn't matter. If there's one person there, I can help. That's all that matters."
That's all that
Mm.
matters. All right, my friend. I will see you next month.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Soon.
Bye, Ralphie. Bye, Night.
Bye bye.
All right.
They say goodbye.
Bye. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us and listening to Dr. Michael Wild. I really, really encourage you to go to his website, drwildcanhelp.com. You can get a 15-minute free consultation with him. This is real. This is actually how we met. And it's just super helpful, and he can guide you to which tests would be beneficial for you to take, and then and it's super easy. They just come in the mail, and you follow the instructions. But anyway, thank you so much. We'll be back next Tuesday night with another show. We'll be live, and I hope you all have a good evening. Thank you. Bye.